With us today is Paul Lux. Paul Lux is the supervisor of elections in Okaloosa County and was also the grand poobah of all supervisors of elections just a couple of years ago. And so we're having him on today to explain what in the world is happening now that Matt Gaetz has resigned, and it seems that everybody is running for his seat in Congress, and what that's going to look like on your end as a voter. So Supervisor Lux, can you kind of explain what is happening now that former Congressman Gaetz has resigned, and what we can expect here in the next couple of weeks?
Well, so like everyone, we are also anxiously awaiting that almighty election schedule, which comes from the Office of the Secretary of State through the governor to us. And as of you and I talking this morning, I have yet to be informed of that schedule. So I can tell you that, of course, as you've already mentioned, and several of your own news pieces on your website have indicated, there is a lot of interest in people running for this seat. I saw an unofficial somebody in the no short list yesterday that had no less than 26 names on it. How many of those people actually file the paperwork? We will have to wait and see. But the people who are filing paperwork now are effectively filing for the election that hasn't been called yet, but on paper with the Division of Elections, they will be filing for the 2026 run. But they'll be able to simply by a simple letter say, okay, move this to the special election. So there are a few people that have stepped out already and actually filed paperwork, or at least one person. But what's going to happen is this. So the governor is going to set the schedule, and that schedule is going to include what I presume, based on history, will be a very abbreviated qualifying period. So people who do want to run should be making preparations now, getting their pre-filing paperwork in, getting their bank accounts set up, so that they're ready to jump in really fast on that qualifying deadline, because it's likely to be only 1 or 2 days long. So it'll probably be like noon on a Thursday to noon on a Friday, for example, or noon on a Wednesday to noon on a Friday. So it'll be a very, very short qualifying period. We will, from the list I've seen, certainly you don't expect, having had a Democrat run against Matt Gaetz every time for the last, 3 elections at least. I cannot imagine the Democrats are going to sit out of this, which means we're going to have a full primary and a full general election for this. And so we're really just waiting on the dates. Now, a lot of people, certainly in Washington, would love to see the election sooner than later. The unfortunate reality of that is we just finished a pretty major election, right? We just used all of our ballot paper. We just used most of our ballot mailing envelopes for vote by mail. And we have that little sword of Damocles hanging over our head as well, about vote by mail requests expiring at the end of the year. So when who's going to be allowed to vote by mail, or who's going to know to vote by mail? What kind of outreach are we going to have to do in that regard? All of those things are question marks until we see that final schedule. Of course, federal elections require that we mail ballots to overseas military 45 days prior. So if they were to compress the election schedule and not give us that ample time, they're just asking for a nod on the head from the federal government, who is likely to come down and say, if we miss that mailing deadline, we actually have to report to the Department of State, who has to report to the Department of Justice why they missed that deadline. So I don't foresee an election schedule that will infringe on those deadlines for us to mail to absent military and overseas voters, particularly not here in the Sunshine State, the most military-friendly state of the 50. I don't foresee that will happen, but that means an election schedule that's going to be pushed out a little bit further. So I would anticipate seeing, maybe we see an election by mid-February for the primary, and then perhaps somewhere in April for the general election.
So I was about to say, with the 45-day deadline, if you had all the ballot papers and everything ready to go, if we put them all out tomorrow, you wouldn't have an election until January 1, and that's not feasible because of Logistics.
Christmas and a few other things. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, right? I mean, I'm a paranoid guy. We've already purchased a new round of paper. It hasn't come yet, but we've already bought enough paper for a full 2 countywide election. And we're in the process of ordering envelopes. We had to do a little bit of a redesign on the envelopes because now we want to include something on there that reminds people that their vote by mail request is expired. So if it's called early enough, and I'm allowed to generate the request for that election based on people who just voted in the 2024 general. So if I'm required to generate that list of who's going to get a ballot before the 31st of this month or next month, then that will mean more people are going to get ballots. And we're trying to find a way on the envelope to remind them that, hey, by the way, you've got to renew this after the 1st of January again. So we're already working on retooling those envelopes for that reason.
So you're the supervisor of elections for Okaloosa County. This is a multi-county election that would be happening. Are we? Where would we find like a master list of candidates at this point?
Well, so anyone who files is going to file in 2 places. There is federal paperwork to be filed with the Federal Election Commission, and then they will also do all of their campaign filing locally with the Florida Division of Elections. So the Florida Division of Elections website is the best place to go for the list of candidates as they declare, because that will be those are the people, right? I mean, I'm getting a lot of the phone calls, particularly from a lot of the locals who have expressed interest. And, all I can tell them is call this office in Tallahassee because this is who your filing officer will be. These are the people that will set up your online campaign finance stuff. All of that is done by the state, not by us locals. We are just waiting for the election schedule so we can start planning polling places, early voting dates and times, et cetera. We are waiting on the list of candidates so that we can finalize our ballots after the qualifying period is over, and then start, gearing up for the election.
So the other thing that I've talked to with several candidates or people that might become candidates, they're concerned about resign-to-run rules. Do you have any insight as to how that works with what is essentially a federal election versus, state offices?
So I've just been through this with a couple of different people, several of whom are attorneys. And so if you look at the current statute, but then if you follow it back a few iterations of when it has changed. So it was changed back in like 2015, 2011, in an effort to encourage then Governor Christ to move along and become a vice presidential candidate without worrying about losing his governorship. And then in 2012, there were a lot of people who took advantage of that because what they basically said was you can run for federal office without resigning a local office. 4 years later, they dialed that back and said you can run for president or vice president, but any other federal office, you have to resign to run. So the resign to run law is and then it just changed a few more times since then, most notably in the last session where they say they changed it for Governor DeSantis, which is not true necessarily. The language was already clear. You could run for president or vice president without resigning because the law already allows you to do that. What it says is you may not qualify for more than one office if the terms of your office overlap. And no one who runs for president or vice president files qualifying paperwork. You are nominated by a political party to put your name on the ballot as a presidential or vice presidential candidate. So they didn't need to change that law. They put the vice president or president back in there just for clarification in the 2023 session. So they didn't do it for Governor DeSantis specifically. But obviously that was how it was spun by a lot of the media. But at the end of the day, the law right now says if you are running for a federal office and you are currently an office holder, if your terms will overlap or if your office isn't going to expire by the end of the election, then you must resign not later than the 10th day prior to the start of qualifying. This is why the qualifying date becomes important. And this is why the current law also requires that schedule the governor is going to put out must allow for 14 days notice before qualifying. So from whenever that announcement comes out, that's going to be that will start the 14-day clock ticking. So people have 4 days to make up their mind before they have to file a resign-to-run letter. That resign-to-run letter is irrevocable. Once you file it, you are out. Whether you win or lose the other seat you're vying for, you are out of the other seat. Now, what this has the potential to do then for us supervisors down at the local level is a trickle-down effect of more special elections, right? Because if you are a Florida legislator, whether you be a Florida senator or a Florida House member, those seats, much like Matt Gaetz' seat, is required to be filled by special election. It cannot be done by appointment. So although the governor has the authority to appoint U.S. senators, so he will be able to fill Marco Rubio's seat by appointment until the next regularly scheduled election, he is not allowed to do that for U.S. House of Representatives, and he is not allowed to do that for Florida House and Florida Senate members. So anyone currently serving or just recently elected to a Florida Senate or Florida House term who chooses to run will have to resign, and that, of course, will then create a vacancy. So what you will likely see is this trickle down of elections across our district if there are current legislators at the state level who are planning on running for Matt Gaetz' seat.
Y'all have Niceville elections coming up in March, but that would be before kind of the realistic time to have these special elections. Is that fair to say?
Well, like I said, I anticipate the primary is going to be in. Okay. I anticipate the primary to be in February sometime, if they hold to what Paul's best guess anyway. I can tell you, just looking at a special election calendar, if it were to fall somewhere in the middle of February, then qualifying will be wherever they set it, right? So it doesn't have to be, currently the law says the 71st to the 67th day before the election is when qualifying is. They're not going to give us 67 days before qualifying. So it's going to be an abbreviated qualifying period for sure. But, that means we have to start mailing overseas ballots by January 4th for, say, a February 18th election, for example. Back that up to February 11th, which would be the Tuesday before that, and now you're on mailing ballots back in December for overseas military. So if back that up 14 days from wherever they set the qualifying period, and that's when we can expect the announcement.
Right. So, there would not be a world in which, like, for example, you would kind of piggyback off the Niceville elections to do the special election, though, or the primary.
Well, so oddly enough, the municipalities could, by ordinance, move their election to coincide with these elections, but we have two problems. One, candidate qualifying starts for our municipals on December 30th. So we'll be advertising the election date starting first week in December. We will advertise those candidate qualifying periods. So in order for them to move their election up into February would require them to move their qualifying period, which would require us to have advertised about a week ago to move it earlier. And if the general election falls, let's say for talking purposes, the 8th of April, which would be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in April, if that was the day they picked for the general, all of these municipalities, elected officials take office on the 1st of April, so they can't wait until the April 8th election. So we are going to find ourselves in the unenviable position of running a countywide primary, a municipal election for Fort Walton, Shalimar, Niceville, and Laurel Hill, and then a general election after that. So we're going to be running 3 elections in 3 months, presuming everything comes out the way I presume it will.
Would you like a cup of coffee? Would you like another one?
Well, so if you see that green cup back there,
yeah,
with the word coffee in the middle of the medical symbol, that's
yes,
my 32-ounce cup for emergencies.
All right. Well, you might need to break into that. Supervisor Lux, thank you so much for your time today and explaining the sometimes Byzantine architecture of getting people elected to office.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help, Chris. All right. Take care.